On the night of February 16th, 1987, there was a Everett police officer on routine patrol. He's able to observe from several blocks away a glow in the area of Everett Community College. The police officer responds to that location and observes a column of smoke and flame coming up through the roof of that structure, particularly in the area of the library. The officer requests the dispatch of the fire department. When the fire department arrives on scene, they actually make entry into the student union building.
I was the first one in, and I could see an open-air atrium, and on the other side of that atrium, there was a lot of fire.
One of the firefighters who heads in with Sam is 48-year-old Gary Parks, driver of Everett's engine number 2.
Gary was assigned to the engine company. He stayed with the engine. But this time, evidently, he went in. We had been in there 10, 15 minutes, and I noticed that it was getting a lot more smoky.
People die of smoke inhalation all the time. So the crew goes in with Scott air packs on, so they're breathing compressed, fresh air, just like what scuba divers do when they're under the water.
The packs, though they're rated for 30 minutes, usually in a working fire, we'll go through that in 15 minutes. You go through it very, very fast. I had no idea how long I was in there, but I drew a breath, and there was no air in my tank. And I realized this environment is a whole lot worse than I thought. I remember calling out for help. I saw a mask come out to my right. I brought it up to my face to take a breath of air, and I remember handing the mask back, and that's when I saw that it was Gary Parks. And at that point, I saw the hose line. I grabbed that hose line because I knew that hose line was my lifeline out of that fire. I had to hold on to that line and to follow it. And I literally held on to that hose line for dear life till I got out of that fire.
They're struggling to breathe. It's hard for them to talk. Some of them almost didn't make it out when we're crawling out the door, and they realized someone's missing. Gary was not there.
Nearly an hour would pass before firefighters find Gary. He lays motionless on the floor, his helmet to his side. Gary Parks is dead.
At his own risk, he selflessly took off his mask and freely offered the very air that was sustaining him in that fire and held it out toward me. That's why Gary is a hero.
I was asleep, and somebody came up the driveway. I thought, well, that's strange. And I looked and it said Everett Police Department. And I thought, okay, what's going on? They said, I want you to come with us now. So I got into the car with the Everett Police Department, was an officer and a chaplain. Nobody talked to me the whole way. I don't think they knew what to say. They stopped the car at Providence Hospital. I got out, and they came to me and said, I'm so sorry. That's how I found out that Gary had died.
The Everett Fire Department launches an investigation into how the fire started.
As the investigators were processing the scene, they were able to determine that the fire originated behind the library check-in, check-out area. Ultimately, the fire investigators concluded that that was an intentionally set fire by human hands.
The rule and the law in Washington State is if you set a fire, if you're the cause of the fire, and a firefighter dies in a fire, you're guilty of first-degree murder.
There were 3 subjects that were all associated with one another, reportedly by numerous witnesses at the scene of the fire on the night of the fire. I'd qualify these kids as rough and tumble street kids.
They already had somewhat of a criminal history, a criminal past.
Elmer Nash is a troubled 12-year-old boy. He is no stranger to police.
Most of the police at the time really knew who Elmer was because he was in constant trouble.
So as we focused on Elmer, we were able to essentially get a statement from Elmer that he was not involved. We were able to polygraph him and determine if the information that he was providing was factual. He ultimately passed the polygraph. There was no sign of deception, and we as the Everett Police Department detectives determined, let's look elsewhere. This might not be our main suspect, so we need to keep digging.
Unfortunately, there were 3 elderly victims at a residential nursing home fire. The fire investigators were actually able to speak with an eyewitness who was able to describe a very neatly dressed man who was clean-shaven. Once the sketch and the profile of this person were put out to the public, a brother and sister looked at it, and they thought that this kind of looked like their brother, Paul Keller. They actually pulled some gas receipts from Paul's travels, and they were able to determine, looking at those fuel slips, that a lot of the places that he actually got fuel for his vehicle were very close to where these fires were set.
The family notifies the police.
Investigators decided to place Paul Keller under arrest and bring him into police custody. They actually set up the room and essentially told Paul that it was over. And he eventually confessed to over 70 of these fires.
Paul Keller is sentenced to 75 years for the first-degree arson murder of 3 elderly residents at Seattle's Four Freedoms retirement home. Investigators set out to discover if he's also behind the fire that killed Gary Parks.
Investigators began to look at Paul Keller as a potential suspect due to the fact that the fire was set by an open flame to available combustibles. Paul Keller initially set these fires as some type of revenge from having a very overly controlling family. He really got excited by seeing the flames, seeing the firefighters responding, watching the fireground activities.
Police begin to build a case. They unearth promising leads tying Paul to the college blaze.
There were witnesses that said, oh, Paul Keller lived near the Everett Community College fires. Additionally, Paul was said to have been on video the night of the fire, where they had a film crew that was videotaping the fire. And so we needed to try and get that film.
Yet the case against Paul Keller begins to show cracks.
A lot of Paul Keller's fires were set on the exterior of a structure. The Everett Community College fire was actually set in the library. So the Everett Community College fire was determined not to fit within the general pattern of the fires set by Paul Keller. Investigators were able to determine through speaking with this landlord that Paul Keller, in fact, did not reside at this residence at the time of the fire. In fact, he had lived there after the fire.
Detectives were unable to find any video that had Paul Keller there.
Years pass. Gary's family grows despondent.
I just kind of gave up, you know. I thought, well, if it's going to get solved, it will, but you give up hope after a while.
Like smoke rising from the library that claimed Gary's life, justice for this fallen hero drifts out of reach, and the case grows cold.
Paul Keller actually agreed to speak with me.
Keller sticks to his statement that he didn't set the college fire.
This was one of the only cases that he didn't confess to and was always adamant that he wasn't involved.
Detective Atwood shifts gears to suspect number 2, Elmer Nash. The now 41-year-old petty criminal has no known address. But at the Snohomish County Jail, Detective Atwood gets a lucky break.
Elmer Nash is standing at the counter. He had just gotten arrested and was being booked into the jail. I just threw caution to the wind and went for it. So I went up and talked to Elmer and I said, hey, do you mind coming back to the station? I'd love to talk to you about a case that I'm working. And the words came out of his mouth. He goes, oh, is this about the fire at the college? That blew me away a little bit. I said, well, as a matter of fact, it is. And he goes, sure. We're talking, and Detective Kowalczyk from Everett PD says, we can do a polygraph. Elmer says, yes. They get done. Detective Kowalczyk comes out, and she goes, he failed miserably.
Slowly, a story forms about the night the library caught fire.
Elmer put himself on scene, said he was there as a lookout. He described himself as climbing through a window or a hatch. Elmer puts himself that he may have fed fuel to the fire, but he didn't start it. He kept minimizing, and then eventually said that he had started the fire. I asked him why he started the fire, and he said to cover up evidence. They were in the school trying to steal stuff.
So May 2021 is the sentencing hearing for Elmer Nash. This is a big deal. There are over 100 firefighters showing up, past and present, for this hearing, except we were missing one thing. Elmer Nash was absent. It was beyond belief that Elmer Nash never showed up for the sentencing. At the second sentencing hearing, he was admonished by the judge severely for not abiding by his wishes and showing up. Elmer was up at the podium and just sobbing, telling the family, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did. I did not mean to do this. I'm so sorry for the loss of your husband, the loss of your father. We saw this grown man that was as if he was 12 years old trying to apologize to everybody in the courtroom.
It was about as real as you can get. It was tough to watch.
Aaron, Jen, Kathy had the opportunity to read a letter to the court, and they asked for exceptional sentencing. The judge went through a litany of concerns that he had with Elmer. The plea agreement was for 2.5 years. He got 10 years for the crime he committed.
He killed my dad. I was glad he got 10 years.
Elmer took a hit for what he did. I honestly don't think that Elmer was alone that night, but I think he's a loyal guy, but he also took the hit for what he had done.